The Red Sox versus the Yankees. Real Madrid versus Barcelona. The Clovers versus the Toros. The greatest sporting rivalries of all time. But none of them can compare to the Greens and the Blues. The year was about 2,000 years before the year that it is now. Western Rome had fallen. Eastern Rome had taken up the mantle of responsibility, and Jesus was the new hot thing all the cool kids were doing. Rome's successor was the Byzantine Empire. Their capital was Constantinople, and they still considered themselves Romans. Now, being Roman, this meant, among other things, they really liked their games. But they were Christians now, so they believed in the sanctity of human life. This meant they couldn't do blood sports anymore, like extreme murder Cluedo, where the mystery was it was the lion with the lion's mouth in the Colosseum. Instead, the Constantinopes found the first of many loopholes in the Bible, and made their new favourite sport chariot racing, where all the murders were manslaughter at worst, and therefore God didn't mind. And when you went to the chariot races, there was only two teams worth rooting for, the Greens and the Blues. They played against each other in Constantinople's Hippodrome, which sounds like a shitty version of the Hyperdome, which I just found out is a supermarket and not a massive sports stadium like it should be. Because the track was shaped like a skateboard, almost every time they had to make a turn there would be a crash. Naturally, this is exactly what the Romans loved about the games. Even in races where no one died, the blood god would still get his due, because the fans of these games were absolute equestrian lunatics. Just imagine the worst sports riot you've ever seen, and then light it on fire and give everyone a sword. And just to make everything even worse, these weren't just sports teams, they were also the world's first proto-political parties. The Greens represented the people, the unwashed, ill-informed masses supporting higher taxes on the wealthy classes and a stronger social welfare system, while the Blues were representative of the greedy, pampered noble class, in favour of religious orthodoxy and stronger political powers. By making the games political, it kind of put both sides of their issues on a level playing field. You see, the Romans were the type of people who valued social cohesion and a competitive spirit.
Roman citizen.
You son of a bitch!
Fair enough. So you have two fanatically devoted fan bases that were effectively gangs running around in blue and green bandanas that also ascribed political outcomes to the result of a Christian-friendly equestrian death race and would regularly cause race riots, no, not that kind. And nothing would ever go wrong. At one point, one of the biggest sporting riots, if not the biggest sporting riot of all time, occurred. It's remembered as the Nika riots. The emperor at the time, Justinian, had three problems. 1. He'd just lost a war, or at least some major battles in a war. 2. He was trying to raise taxes. And 3. He was fighting corruption. Fighting corruption made the Blues hate him. Raising taxes made the Greens hate him. And losing major battles in the war made everyone hate him. In the previous riots, yes, they were that common. There was a few murders. Most of the murders were rounded up, but a couple of them escaped. The problem was, one of them was a Green, and the other was a Blue. They had both taken shelter in the same hiding place in the city. And the people, united by their hate of Justinian and their love of murderers, demanded that they be set free. So to calm everyone down, Justinian organised some more games. The games started out normally, both teams were shouting slogans for their own sides, but as the day went on, one chant became clear above all else. Nika, Nika, meaning victory. The mob took this to mean, let's kill everyone, and a riot started. The situation quickly got out of control, and Justinian had to bail to his palace. He would be trapped in there for 2 weeks. What started out as a normal race riot, no, not that kind, soon became a full-on rebellion. Gradually, the mob started talking about getting a new emperor and setting up a system that they would prefer. Now, hypothetically, a new emperor would need to be someone that the people liked, but who also had a good claim to the throne. Hypothetically, this would be someone called Hypatius. Hypatius was not the kind of man who actually wanted to be emperor. He had a better claim than Justinian, but he'd never gone for it. In fact, he was the kind of person who liked to keep his head down, especially because, at the time of the riots, he was hiding out in the palace with Justinian. Justinian, for his part, was worried about a coup being thrown within the palace. He considered having Hypatius killed, but he felt that that would make him even more of a tyrant, giving the people more reason to hate him. Instead, he sent him out, hoping that he would be lost forever. Hypatius had barely been out of the palace for 5 minutes before the mob found him and declared him the new emperor. He kind of just went with it. Personally, I don't blame him. I mean, I already said he was the kind of person to keep his head down. He probably thought if he just did what they said, he could get out of this alive. Now the mob controlled the city, and they had a new emperor. Justinian was terrified. He was ready to run away to Greece forever. That's when his wife, Theodora, stepped in. She told him to nut up, shut up, and go and deal with the mob. It's kind of surprising that this worked. I mean, someone else surely would have been telling Justinian to go and do the exact same thing. But it wasn't until Theodora told him to do this that he actually listened. She actually gave a really inspiring speech. I won't quote it verbatim, but the gist of it was, "I will not die poor." With his balls out of his wife's purse and back between his legs, he sent a messenger out, who was a eunuch and therefore didn't have balls, to meet the mob. The eunuch met with the leaders of the mob and paid them off. Once they'd gone home, he sent in the cavalry. Thousands of city guards descended upon the mob. It was a slaughter, the likes of which had never been seen in Roman history. By the end of the Nika riots, 30,000 people would be dead. Considering that at the time Constantinople had a population of about 400,000, that's about 7.5% of the population. To put that into a modern perspective, that would be like if Little John Island in Maine had a riot that killed 8.5 people. But it wasn't all bad. Here's another story. You might have heard of the walls of Constantinople. They're kind of a big deal. But they weren't always. The best part of the walls was what's called the Theodosian walls, built by Emperor Theoden of the Rohirrim. You see, the city was expanding very quickly, and so they decided they'd build some nice walls. Not just any walls. Big, beautiful, powerful walls. It took something like 9 years to complete, and when they were done, oh boy, let's say you're an invading Ottoman. Well, first you have to get through a 7-meter deep, 20-meter wide ditch that could be filled with water or bees. On the other side of this ditch would be a wall about the size of a man that he could use for cover, while he throws even more bees and honey at you. Beyond that was the outer wall, about 6 meters tall and about 2 meters thick. From here, the Constantinopian defenders could fire even more bees and honey onto the attackers, leaving you to die of anaphylactic shock and bee sting-induced social anxiety. This wall was dotted with 10-meter towers, every 70 meters or so, each one able to give the defenders an even better bee-throwing position. Managing to get past the outer wall, you'd be faced with the inner wall, named after Sir Leroy Inner, who invented walls in 1645. These bad boys were 10 meters tall with a dummy thick 5-meter girth. Dotted along the inner wall was 96 towers, each one 20 meters tall and housing 3 artillery machines, which historians have agreed could project bees distances so great that many of them could not fly home in their short bee lifespans. Upon completion, the Theodosian walls were considered some of the most impressive walls ever constructed. And then, there was an earthquake. A massive chunk of the walls came down overnight. It had cost a fortune to build them the first time, and now they were basically ruined.
You're ruining it!
Leaving the city largely defenseless. Needless to say, it was a panic party. And then, there was another earthquake. Even more of the wall came crashing down, and the city was basically defenseless, and the panic party got even better. Luckily, for the Constantinopians, there wasn't a famous warlord roaming around in the Baltics.
Hi, I'm
Attila the Hun.
That's right. This had come during the reign of Attila the Hun, who was currently roaming the Baltics, less than 1,000 miles away. He could easily cover the distance in a matter of months, and with Constantinople being one of the most prized cities in the entire world at the time, there was little doubt that he would.
He's coming! He's coming!
They had to find a way to get the walls back up quick, because if they didn't, an army of Huns would descend upon the city in less than 2 months. It was going to be the fall of Rome to Ostrogoth Boogaloo. So Emperor Theodosius revealed his cunning plan. After calling in the military for help, he declared a brand new sport: wall building. The Greens and the Blues would compete against one another to rebuild sections of the wall. Whoever could complete their assigned section of the wall first would win. The teams were going to work against each other together, and it wasn't just the athletes who were expected to compete. It was also the fans. And holy shit did they pitch in. Those with the necessary labour skills started working on the walls themselves. Those with money started paying for the labour and the resources required. And those with neither skills nor money picked up a shovel and did what they could. The Roman spirit was ignited in a flurry of competition. Gates were built, walls were constructed, towers were erected. The glory of Rome was fully erect. In 60 days, the walls that took 9 years to complete were fully repaired. Attila the Hun was foiled. And yes, it goes without saying that the people probably knew the consequences of not getting these walls up in time. There was a military operation to get these walls back up, and there was an entire section being paid for by the government. But it just goes to show how deep-seated this rivalry was in their culture. The fact that it could be drawn on in a time of emergency like this to get something done is kind of amazing. This wasn't just a few fanatical fans. Thousands upon thousands of people actually spent 2 months of their lives doing hard labour and spending their own money on this project. And yes, that was for their own safety, but it was also just so they could stick it to the other team. To the Byzantine people, supporting the Greens and the Blues wasn't just about the love of the sport. It was a sign of patriotism and love for their own culture. I joked earlier that they were united by their love for violence, but these teams and games really did unite them as Romans. The Greens and Blues' hate for one another was superseded by the cultural unity of passionately loving the culture that actually spawned this. It was in their politics, in their military traditions, in their art, and it was in their blood. So that's it, the most heated sports rivalry of all time. One that saved and almost tore apart its home city on many occasions.